Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another minigame podcast for Friday, May 23rd. We'll go through some warm-up for about an hour and then we'll jump into the video game news. So, yesterday was a meetup thing that I've done now twice, and boy was it a different experience. There shockingly seems to be something about getting a much larger draw when you have a Mario Kart tournament than just having a general meetup and not doing anything. And so there was really, while there was about 30 people the first time I went, and these meetings are like 2 months apart, so who knows, this could just be the time of the year situation too. There's all kinds of conventions and events and other things that could also get in the way. But yeah, I think basically 2 months ago, people would have been in summer or just not as busy in school, but all these were adults, so it would be like the adults who had kids maybe would be in trouble, but honestly not all of them were that old enough to really have kids that were that old. Although, in fairness, in yesterday's meetup I also had a nice time with a lady who I would have described as young lady, but had a 20-year-old kid and was bringing her son effectively to the meetup too, so I don't know if you can really describe her as that young lady, but she certainly looked like a young lady to me, which is just probably a case of me being old-minded and old in my way of thinking. But yeah, if there's 30 people in the first meetup 2 months ago, I would be surprised if there was, I mean, I can basically just count in my mind, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people about, including 3 people who are running the meetup, or honestly, I guess 14 people, 4 people running the meetup. And there was, while it did have the Nintendo Switches and the setup that they had before, there was just not a lot of push people to actually play the Mario Karts or whatever other games they had on the Switches. And then so there was more of a natural push when I arrived there, which was almost on time, to sit at a table and play board games. I think I used the wrong term at one point, tabletop games, but I would definitely describe it as tabletop games. Maybe that means specifically things like Warcraft and Dungeons and Dragons, but yeah, we weren't doing that. There was one group there of 5 people who were fairly insular. Like, they got there very early and they were playing rounds of the same game over and over again for the entire time I was there, which I suspect was 2 or 3 hours. And so I played like one little brain puzzle type game that is very similar to a game that you can get for free on Steam called Sigils of Elohim, where you have a bunch of Tetris pieces and you have to make them fit. I played a game like that with the young lady for a little bit, and then the event coordinators had this Kickstartered, although I'm not even sure it really is on Kickstarter, game of their own design, and we convinced him, me and 3 other people convinced one of the coordinators to come over and basically dungeon master and explain to us this game, which really we were, I definitely, personally, I'll speak only for myself, I guess, I was trying to do a favor for them and just help them test their new board game. So, let me start off by saying that is very whiplash inducing. Not to the point where I'd say nah, I'm not going to come again. It's just after a 2-month pause between each event, it's hard to have too much enthusiasm around these events, but I'll probably still go as long as I'm still welcome, which who knows. There's always a possibility I would wear out my welcome there. But I am definitely not putting much in the field of hopes and dreams and it being too much of anything, just because it does seem like it comes and goes and it is just so infrequent. And yes, I know when you run these kinds of events and you are going to just have a decent amount of burnout, and it may very well just boil down to a couple of clicks or one in-group and anybody new, which it did seem like there was a decent number of new people. In fact, I would say, if I was to guess, all the new people were playing with me, so that group of 4, and all the old people who very possibly were playing the other board game, and they never, not that they really have to, or I'm not even sure how the game would have worked if they tried to invite anybody, but they never like swapped out or anything like that. And again, weirdly, if I was coordinating something like that, I would think you almost would have to do a speed dating thing where you ask people to shuffle around or invite new players. The coordinators, which are really sacrificing their time a lot there, are going to have to work very hard to move people around and get people talking, or people are just going to fall into their group of friends, which weirdly, I think at that bar they already have tabletop games that you could play at any point anyways, so if you had a group of friends, you could probably go and play the tabletop games just fine. But obviously the bar is not going to have the Nintendo Switches and all of that set up. But yeah, there's still, I think, growing, and still a lot of room to grow as far as the coordinators. They just don't really have a PA system. They don't make announcements. They don't have an email list. It definitely feels like they lost a lot of people from the event 2 months ago who definitely should have been heavily encouraged to come back for this event. And yeah, it probably is a case that you are going to lose a decent number of people, maybe 30% of your established group, but you're going to get new people too. So there's a real hope there that you would have some kind of mailing list or Discord or whatever. Like, I'm all into Discord right now, so I'm thinking that may very well be the future of how to communicate people, but it may also very well be that you just need to have everybody on an email list in the good old-fashioned way of doing things. So yeah, it's kind of fine. It's not really talking about video games much when you're playing tabletop games at all, so it is just kind of an event to try to meet people and make friends that have somewhat similar interests, and in this case, not really my interest at all, and that I am not really interested in playing tabletop games, but I'm willing to try. And I think about it, and I imagine of the 6 or 7 times I've played a tabletop game, a board game, or anything, I probably have been playing with adults, as at least a couple adults jumping in and making it a full group who were uninterested in playing those tabletop games too. So it's probably pretty common in those kinds of games that really need 3 or 4 players, that at least a couple of people are playing out of obligation and just don't really care too much. So there's probably a higher demand compared to video games on tabletop games to be engaging, be easy to learn, uh, be approachable for new players. And yeah, so I said let's start with the really bad stuff, and I really haven't though. The worst part is the bar. The bar is just awful. It's it's in need of repair and remodeling, and it doesn't look like any of that repair or remodeling has changed one bit in the 2 months from the that I've seen it. It was in need of repair and remodeling in one section 2 months ago. I came yesterday, it's still in the exact same shape. In the middle, later in the evening, not in the middle, both bathrooms just totally broke, and so there was just like not meeting health code, no toiletries at all in the whole facility, with this being a place that serves food and alcohol and drink, which I did confirm that they probably don't have a cocktail menu and can't make cocktails, which, if I was to guess, means they probably don't serve any kind of hard liquor, and are really just a wine bar, beer and wine bar place. Now, this second time was nowhere as busy. The first time there was like 2 events happening at the same time, which double booking events is wrong. And there was just a ton more people overall at the place. So that would definitely be evidence that either there's a reason that a bunch more people were there the first time, and because there was a bunch more people at the bar in general, a bunch of them just moved over to the meetup section, and so they got a big boost there, where this time there wasn't anybody else, and so it was very empty. But for being very empty, the bar still had the music way too loud, and it wasn't just me having the problem with it. The board game maker who was explaining the rules was having a real hard time hearing me, and I was having a real hard time hearing him. So yeah, and since the bar was empty, it might very well have been the case that the coordinators just needed to go and ask them to turn the music way down, and they would have done it. Or it might be a case that they just absolutely refused to do that. And I know that I've heard that the arrangement is that some percentage of the sales is kicked back to the coordinator, so they get a little bit further time. But it can't be too much, although in fairness they did charge me about $8.50 for 3 cans of 7-Up, which is all I drank. Which gets me to my next point. This bar, and I think this is infuriating to me, but it would almost certainly be fighting reasons for anyone else, steals your glasses. I mean, straight up. You go up, I get a glass full and put 7-Up in it, and I'm going to nurse that glass and drink all of it, and after about an hour or two, I look over where I had left the glass on the table just right next to me, and one of the waiters came by, said absolutely nothing to me, and took a glass that still had drink in it. If you paid $20 for any kind of alcohol there, and they're stealing your alcohol from you, I mean, talk about a ripoff. But yeah, I basically got robbed for what probably was a quarter worth of 7-Up. But I mean, I'm already getting robbed quite a bit by that. But I just can't imagine anybody appreciates them running around and grabbing glasses when the glass is next to somebody and it's clearly still being used by that person. Or at any other restaurant where you would get like free refills on fountain drinks, and it's insane this bar doesn't have fountain drinks. And anyways, they are getting them out of a can, out of some refrigerator in the back, basically. But even in that, when you have free refills on things, every waiter I've ever had that's good at any restaurant asks you, do you want me to take this? Or I would put it extremely far away, and it would be a glass that would be completely empty before they would even begin to touch it. So yeah, they're a bar that effectively does nothing as far as going, has no reason to even come in front of the bar, and yet they're running around every now and then and grabbing and stealing drinks from people. So yeah, the bar is definitely the worst part, particularly after drinking 3 Sprites and then having the bathrooms be broken. I was in quite a state, and frankly left the party a little early just because of that situation. Now, I'm going to try to be incredibly generous and minimal in what I'm going to say next, in that I'm still definitely rooting for the people who made their own little board game there, but I personally didn't really get it. Didn't really find anything amazing or good on it. Again, I've only played like 6 board games. I've certainly covered video game versions of board games, but even when I do that, I generally am not too enthusiastic about the board games. One thing that's interesting is that the board game had what I thought was good, but perhaps a little generic visuals in it, other than the logo. And they said it was a print-on-demand service. So I want to look into it at some point if I ever have a ton of free time. Not that this doesn't really matter, so I don't have to really look into it. But I wonder if there are board games, although this isn't actually a board game, it's more of a card game. It just has a bunch of cards and a bunch of other little pieces. But I wonder if the print-on-demand services, effectively, if there are some out there that will license out pictures and images and print the cards in different orientations, so that they would have like a website where, yes, you're making your game, but you're not having to hire an artist to animate things. Maybe you pay a little bit for the logo to be made. I would suspect maybe you're not getting any kind of trademarks or copyrights in this print-on-demand thought. And frankly, services like this might be claiming that they own the copyright overall, and you may not really care about that, but you probably should. And so I wonder if there's a service like that. And I'm not going to make any accusations that that is what this board game was, but it definitely seems to evoke that thought in me. And it would be certainly an interesting offer. An offer that many would take if anybody wanted to make a board game. But in my small amount of watching other YouTubers who are smarter than me review board games, which I only do on rare occasions, there are some things and impressions and opinions that I've picked up on. Again, I'm no expert, and I'm not the target audience, so I really don't know. I really wanted to hear the opinion of the person sitting next to me, because he actually had played a lot of board games and Dungeons and Dragons, so he really would have been the expert, and he just took off and didn't say anything, because I really was hoping to turn to him and say, what do you think, and get his opinion there. But I'm not even sure that the other 3 people playing with me really knew that we were that my intention there was to play the role of beta tester and try and get as much feedback to them as possible, although I'm not sure how much feedback they really need, or with the print on demand and with it being so close to being released. So from my general opinions, it felt like there was a lot of rules. It was, I think, probably close to 17 minutes of setup and rules before we even started, all of it being explained to all four of us, and that was with someone who actually made the game, not us trying to follow instructions. And just a lot of things there, in that there are cards that are card size, there are cards that are tarot card size, thus bigger, there are cards that are like event cards, there are cards that are item cards, there are cards that are decision cards. There was, let me just guess here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It felt like there was about 7 roughly different types of cards in the game, with 2 different sizes, and yeah, then there was a little cardboard standee that felt to me like it was just unnecessary to even be in the game, that was just there to act as a token piece to say whose turn it was. And then a lot of rules, a lot of special events. It very complicated is what it came off to me. Like the people that made it had been thinking about it for a very long time, and very well may be experts at games, and this may be exactly the kind of game that expert board game players are all into. It may very well be like the Sudokus that I sometimes do on YouTube, or watching Cracking the Cryptic on YouTube, in that those Sudokus are just like professional level, super difficult. 50 people out of the entire planet have solved them, and that is the audience. And the success there is that nobody is really interested in a simple Sudoku that doesn't have any extra rules or extra complications to it. That people are only interested in crazy, complicated things. I feel like the board game had no randomness in it at all, other than the players, the humans themselves. It didn't have a dice or anything like that that could add any randomness. There was shuffling of cards, so certainly I guess there was a level of randomness there, as that sometimes you would shuffle and pick cards, but it was what I guess you would describe as a social deduction game. I guess the first thing the creator said is, have you played a game called Resistance? And we all said no, which inherently your sales pitch, your elevator pitch, probably shouldn't have to start with, have you played this other game? Instead, break down what the other game is, so everybody will just know. And then for the people in the know, they'll go, oh, it's like Resistance, and you'll go exactly, instead of using a competitor game's name. So yeah, I don't know what parts were like Resistance or not, but to quickly wrap it up, we went through maybe 1 or 2 rounds. The social deduction game basically has one character at least be the bad guy. I got randomly assigned to be the bad guy, and I got sniffed out immediately as being the bad guy. And so they, within the first round, voted to kill me off as a character. And so then I sat out for like 3 or 4 of the remaining 5 rounds, 5, maybe 6 rounds. So I played like the very first round, sat out for over half of the game with a couple of things I could do, but that was it, really. I was basically a tiebreaker, and that was it. And then I was brought back by a healer character once because apparently there were win conditions to get victory points, which I didn't even really understand that. By the time he had gotten to the instructions on that, I had started to tune out, which couldn't be 100% my fault. So yeah, the healer apparently needs all the characters to be alive to get one of her victory points, so the healer brought me back. And then in the exact next round, they killed me off again. There's basically no cost and nothing preventing that from happening. So then I was killed off in the next round, and then the healer brought me back at the very end, in the very last action, again to get her victory point. I don't think the healer inherently thought that I wasn't the bad guy, and basically had no way of defending myself, as the second I get accused, which maybe the guy saw the cards in my hand, because I wasn't really trying too hard to keep it secret, or maybe he just randomly guessed, but I was killed off twice and spent the vast majority of the game not actually doing anything. Which, to try to make the best of that, as I was being accused, I tried to move more into the role of role-playing and try and defend myself somehow and accuse other people and just try to have more of that kind of conversation, which I don't know if any of the other 3 players even knew that's what I was doing, or whether I was just being childish or petty, which it's a fine line there and easy to cross. But since I was the bad guy, I accused the person who tried to kill me off the second time of being the bad guy, and basically framing me to try and kill him off. Not that I think even killing him off would have actually helped me get any of my victory cases. I think because I was killed off the first time, if I hadn't been revived by the healer, I had 0 chance of winning any victory points at all. So yeah, there's a lot of rules, and it's really complicated, and I couldn't even begin to speak to the balance of it, because it's so complicated that I wouldn't even begin to guess if there was some possible balance issues, or if it could be balanced with all that different unique character classes for each person. One thing that the creator did, and I don't think he probably caught on to this, but maybe he did, is that he suggested an example at the beginning of throwing out cards in the first round to cause a failure scenario, and it subliminally primed each of the players who had no reason to be throwing out a failure card. And because I effectively had a double failure card that set me up for exposing myself more than I thought it would, and perhaps in retrospect I should have been the one to say the win card, but there was no reason at all that all 4 players should be setting up for a failure scenario, because only some of the character classes wants more victories than failures. at least a couple of the character classes wants more victories over failures. So, and who knows, maybe that is part of the balance there, is that if there had been the right group of characters, different character classes, maybe nobody at the table had a win condition that said had more victories than failures, even though I was the character class of assassin, which was the real bad guy overall. There were definitely some neutral characters that had win conditions where you had more failures than successes. So yeah, I tried all kinds of BS, and I didn't really feel super great as far as arguing and trying to do my best impression of Danganronpa, accusing and counter accusing and trying to twist logic. Although for a brief moment it definitely felt a little fun to play the bad guy, since I had at that point nothing to lose. But I felt a little bad because the person I was accusing was the 20-year-old kid of the young lady, and the young lady was also playing with us, so it really was him being 20 years old. He may have been a little bit mentally slow, I'm not sure, but to me an average 20-year-old feels like they might be mentally slow or not. So, but I guess I treated him as fairly as I would have treated anyone in this weird situation of a social deduction. But there basically were zero accusations against anybody else, and as I was killed off, I couldn't make accusations really, so I was the only one really trying to roleplay. And definitely it would have been a different game had it been 4 seasoned players who knew how social deduction games go. At that point I would have been the weakest person at the table as far as knowing how to play the game, and but I would have kind of gotten the idea of role playing. And yes, I do occasionally in game form enjoy playing the bad guy. But yeah, I don't want to be super cruel on it. My best suggestions really would not be anything about the game, and maybe the experience I had is it felt like it took really long because I wasn't doing anything, but maybe that was just a random experience that sometimes happens but doesn't happen that often. There is, I think, from what I've seen, a lot of weirdness around board games, and that a board game that is good but not your favorite may only be played 15-20 times over the course of a few years, and a lot of board games that are only played once and then put back in the box and never played again, and a lot of board games just don't sell in the first place. And it almost certainly is a tough thing, very competitive thing to do. I imagine board game players are always looking for something new, but often probably play games once and then move on. And yeah, even though I do know that there's a print-on-demand service out there that make board games, I don't think I would really... I can't imagine a scenario where I would be able to make a board game that would be any good at all. Like, I don't have the experience there. I don't know the target audience. I can't really even be a critic on it. So the best suggestions that I can make, and did make to them, it was just reducing the part count and thinking about the box and thinking about the sales aspect of it. In that the box in the prototype they had a bunch of stuff, and because you have 2 cards of 2 sizes, those cards are never going to fit inside of a card long box that you might have if you had like a whole bunch of Magic the Gathering. I talked about what it looked like you could sell expansions for, gave some suggestions on how to reduce some of the cardboard stuff, and that's about as much as I could really think of it. And yes, if I was going to make my own board game, probably would be something closer to like the Binding of Isaac 4 Souls, in that it would be so crazy and so unique in the art that I would probably go bankrupt just trying to develop it. But yeah, I definitely would want something crazy and unique. Probably I would go to Shift Up and say, hey, let me license all of the characters from Destiny Child, or let me license the characters from Stellar Blade. I'm not sure there's quite enough characters from Stellar Blade to make some kind of tabletop game from it, but that would be something I would think about. Or Nike Goddess of Victory, plenty of characters in that too. But yeah, I definitely would want a game that would stand out in an art style, and it would probably stand out too much. I bet most tabletop gamers are not into the anime aesthetic too much. Even when you think of like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, the anime aesthetic is not particularly big and popular or prominent in that artwork. And I have no idea about systems, so I don't know what kind of board game system I would try to create. I would try to keep something, I'd try to make it really small. I would want it to fit in effectively something closer to the size of a pack of cigarettes, and maybe then with multiple expansions go into a larger collector's box that had 3 or 4 expansions each on something like that. And then maybe one box that would be about the size of a pack of cigarettes would have the extra components, the tokens, the dice, any counters or anything like that. But yeah, I would really want to get it down to the point where it could fit in someone's pocket and they could just carry it with them at any time and play it as much as possible, which I guess is the goal of tabletop games, but maybe not. So yeah, that's 40 minutes of talking about tabletop games instead of video games, which is all about a third of the time that the meetup was there, is that you're doing tabletop games instead of video games, which would be fine if you had a meeting every 2 weeks and then 1 week every month was tabletop games and then 1 week was video games. Really, at some point, I think what I'd really love is have a bunch of content creators get together. I'm not sure there's even enough of them in my area to justify doing that, where we could sit around and actually talk about making making YouTube content. But yeah, there's I would like something like that, but that probably would just be something more of a Discord with occasional conversations than a meetup per se. Even when YouTube does meetups amongst content creators, there are very few people that actually can attend. I probably will also try now to avoid playing any tabletop games for my channel for a while, just so I don't get to rambling too much. So Computext has also been happening, and there was one interesting thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm expanding my news sources, not to include Yahoo Tech, but I'm watching some YouTube videos of Computex. Gigabyte announced a prototype, effectively, motherboard that would use this new standard of RAM called CUDIM, which is not super new, but it is flat and it connects to a connector that is very similar to what the CPU connects to. And this is actually not the motherboard that they are doing that with. This is a different motherboard, although it looks somewhat similar to it, because the CUDIM RAM on the motherboard I saw was going right here, where you can see more standard RAM slots, which I have no idea why there are even RAM slots here, because the RAM slots are usually here, and so I don't even know what this is under here. But yeah, CUDIM RAM is just built on a newer standard where the current RAM slots are like 20 years old as far as that connection standard, and have some major problems now at higher speeds and higher capacities and voltage, and so it's just an improvement all over. Just shy of 13,000 megatransfers per second, and they use liquid nitrogen to keep the memory as cold as possible for the attempt. Yeah, and so they were showing off a working they were showing off a working motherboard with that CUDIM RAM, and they were showing off some numbers that were very interesting. I believe it was Linus Tech Tips though that I saw the video covering it, and that was certainly way better visually than this article. This is not CUDIM RAM though at all. Let's see. That was just a link to a affiliate link, I believe. Let's see if I can find CUDIM RAM and show a picture of it. I should have done a little bit more research. I just opened this really early. Reason I'm starting about 15 minutes later than I intended was because my macros decided to break and go wild, and I'm not 100% sure why. And now a whole bunch of stuff is. It's not CUDIM RAM, is it? This isn't the new RAM. This isn't what I saw. I don't think. I think this is what I saw. Yeah. So I guess CUDIM is a description. Let's see if we can get this picture bigger. And yeah, my internet's not working great. While we're waiting for this to load, I will say SteamOS is updated and is basically claiming now that you can experiment with installing it on other devices, although they are very still much focused on handheld and AMD only systems. Please, no NVIDIA stuff. So maybe CUDIM in its different speeds comes in different form factors, but what I was saying was this, where on the back side of these connectors are just a whole bunch of pins that are connecting directly to the motherboard, and then you are just actively screwing it down with screws and not trying to snap it into place, which, you know, going the screws so that things don't get jostled loose is a smart move. Oh, and by the way, I think I was talking about the idea of how power supplies probably should have current sensing and temperature sensing on the wires and should be able to warn you if a connection is loose. At Comtex, there is a power supply they were showing off that does have that feature. It is not inherently a whole new standard, but it is something that if the price is right, you might consider. You get a power supply that can just through some kind of USB internal interface send a signal to your computer if it senses that one of your power cords is loose or that there's a problem. And yeah, there's something else I suggested that they are also, well, no, I didn't suggest this one. They also have power supplies at Computex, and a lot of this, if not all of it, may be vaporware and never show up. But power supplies that have battery backups for your computer, giving you maybe about 16 minutes and a 500 watt power supply of battery backup. Apparently there's some major efficiency you can get because the power supply in the computer is already converting AC to DC. All of the battery equipment and all the battery backup functions then just have to focus on DC output, and they don't have to convert it back to AC like a battery backup would. And so that gains it some efficiency, plus apparently the batteries in this power supply that they're showing off is just way better than the lead acid batteries you would get in a battery backup. But yeah, this is mostly for laptops, but if it becomes the new standard, which there probably should only be one standard, this being in motherboards would work very nicely. It'd still give you the opportunity to choose how much RAM you want in your system and not have to buy a motherboard with RAM put on it. But it is definitely changing the game as far as how you attach things and how the speed will be. In that it will just be a thing you screw down, a square-like device that you screw down. One of the advantages of it being flat instead of being on its side is going to be that you might get better airflow, and CPU coolers could become lower profile, closer to the CPU, whereas often CPU coolers have to put their heat sinks above the height of RAM. One of the disadvantages of it being flat, though, is that you are losing some of the square footage or square centimeters of area on the other side to cram more chips on it. Although I think we're past a point where that really matters too much. Even in this example, you're seeing there's really only 4 chips of RAM here, and I think we really have hit a point where they could squeeze more that way. That disadvantage, however, also gets thrown out the window somewhat by the fact that because you're not using the backside for more chips of RAM, you are therefore making the connections much closer to each chip. So you see each of these squares could be a connection directly to the motherboard, whereas many of the connectors on these chips on a regular RAM stick might have to move around a lot more, or maybe not directly connect at all, and then there might have to be a chip in the middle that is doing some kind of error correction or memory management to access these other chips. So yeah. Now I do think there might be a danger that this is just going to be your standard situation with RAM, though, where this would be the equivalent of 2 sticks, and this would be the equivalent of having only 1 stick in your CPU. And I don't think they're ever going to get to a point where they encourage you just to snap something like this off and put another one in. So pretty much it's already the case that you should always buy in pairs, but the idea of replacing one single stick with something that would be the equivalent of 2 dual channel sticks might be very irritating for a few people who like to upgrade, but then That also solves a lot of problems of people mix and matching RAM and that causing a bunch of problems, or having a single stick of bad RAM and not really knowing what it is, or putting RAM in the wrong slots. So with a new form factor where you only screw this down and that's all you get, and that it is effectively just going to be like dual channel RAM, although it may actually be much higher in technicality from dual channel. But yeah, I don't think you're likely going to see any motherboards where you have a square that can screw down and then another square that can screw down, which might limit you, and these things right now are very expensive. But yeah, in the future, I question whether it won't just be one standard and you'll have enough RAM and it will be cheap enough for you to get what you want. These might be prototypes of what a single stick equivalent would look like. Although, notice these screws actually don't really line up. And this one in the center looks like it might even be a peg and not a screw hole. But yet, you have a hole here, hole here, hole here, hole here, and here. Whereas this one has holes completely different places in completely different spacing. Maybe it's the Cam 2 concept. But that's the RAM I saw. And that may very well be the future. Which is a good future to go to, because plenty of people have broken parts of RAM or the connectors the RAM go into, trying to plug in RAM and doing it slightly wrong. It's a terrible connector, really, and it's due for an update, certainly. Although I would argue the power supply connectors are also due for an update, and pretty much everything on modern motherboards and PCs, except for NVMe connections, are very, very old at this point, and there is a lot of room for improvement. One of the things that SteamOS seems to have, at least the beta does, is at some point they snuck in the program CUPS, C-U-P-S, the Command Utility Printing Service or something like that is what that stands for. So while the desktop version of KDE Plasma, an updated version of KDE Plasma, does not have all of the packages it needs to automatically detect a printer, I can confirm that after running a command, and I'm not sure I really needed to run the command, I was able to click the Add Printer button from the system settings and add my network plugged in laser printer and actually print from it. So print from a browser. Weirdly, at the moment, I cannot really confirm that Firefox as a browser is installable on SteamOS, but a customized version of Firefox, I think called Floof, F-L-O-O-F or something like that, will install and work from the Package Manager Discover Center, which, yeah, you really need it, because when I went back into Steam, into the desktop mode on SteamOS, the Manifest version 3 of Chromium, which is still mostly made and maintained by Google, now forces Manifest version 3, and plugins and extensions like uBlock Origin were disabled and labeled as incompatible. And even though you can leave them enabled, I suspect they are not actually doing what they need to. So I thought maybe you could just use Chromium and Google's nonsense with Manifest version 3 and trying to block uBlock Origin wouldn't affect it, but that was far too hopeful. I was pretty sure that I was being far too hopeful. Anyways, I haven't played with it too much. I was playing with it a little bit more just because of my macros taking so long. But yeah, there's a ton of updates, and we'll probably get a Gaming on Linux article covering it all. But yeah, the fact that somebody did sneak in printer support is nice. It is also coming with a program called File Light that just shows how much files on desktop mode are taking up space, which that's nice. And so yeah, I don't know if there are any major speed bumps now with SteamOS to the point where I would have any hesitation trying to install SteamOS on my new computer whenever I get around to building my new computer, which may be a while. Yeah, I had a whole new cell phone I was going to move all my apps to and start using, and just today I realized, you know what, I started the transfer process a couple of months ago. At this point, I would have to start all over again and just copy everything from my current phone, and I might as well just let my current phone be my current phone for as long as possible until the battery becomes either intolerable or I actually do lose it, break it or something. So on my current phone, I'm still playing Memento Mori. I was going to try that on the Steam Deck just to see what that sounded like on the speakers, since the Steam Deck has some nice speakers. I am still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. And I am still playing Magica Modica. And Magica Modica in particular, I'm still just like really close to being maxed out on that. And see, that is about an hour. Let me close that. It just does not want to close. And so what I want to do is we'll rush through the rest of the news when I get back from my first bathroom break, but I'm going to take that right now. So I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be back in like 20 minutes. Okay, I'm back. One of the unpleasant thought I had in the break there is, with my house being such a mess right now, like I could easily slip and fall and then just pathetically be stuck in the floor. Break your back, break your neck, something like that. It could be so many different things. And it's not like I would be able to shout for help, and certainly nobody would be able to hear me on the microphone because I mute the microphones. So yeah, but there was a Netflix movie, I think it was called Jared's Game or something game, that was based off of Stephen King, probably short story, maybe a novel, where a lady and the husband were about to do some light bondage and she gets handcuffed to the bed, and then the husband has a heart attack, and so the lady is just stuck on this bed and cannot free herself, and she just goes through this horrific scenario where she starts hallucinating, and you don't know if what she's seeing is real or what is going on while she is just trapped on this bed. Now, fortunately for the movie, she doesn't just starve to death or die, but it is certainly a scary thought. Although I'm not sure the Netflix movie did it really any justice, because that is very much an internal, probably a little bit more feminine style of story to tell, whereas most movies you're expecting a lot more visual and action, not to have a story where you're spending almost all of your time in the same room, trapped in your own mind. So yeah, that was one of the thoughts I had in the break there. Not really related to that. That is, I guess, part of my personality that makes me a good critic, is that there is just an eye towards the darker side of life, the negative. Certainly, I think a lot of people try to be critics, particularly video game critics. They would call themselves that, and they just don't have any kind of negativity that they could say or would be willing to say on anything. Which, to that aspect, as I'm continuously growing and working on my Discord, which very possibly will just be 100% post by me and no one else, I did put out a first draft of a standard disclaimer whenever I contact anybody and talk to them, because in particular, as somebody who's giving advice or criticism, mostly in the case that people are not asking for advice or criticism, and so I tend to give it out once to people, and then I'm trying really hard to not really contact the person again unless they show genuine interest or wants for more feedback. And I try my very best to not be critical and be a lot more about giving advice, but even giving advice gets read as criticism by a lot of artists. Artists are a soft bunch of people, effectively, who can easily have their feelings hurt. Which, I might as well connect this to me still playing Blackwell Epiphany and going through its director's commentary, second playthrough, which it kind of feels like the artist, who also has some commentary, worked a little bit more on the game than you would seem, and had a little bit more control on the final product than you would think. There was at least one commentary that gave that indication. But yeah, I'm really in a very bad place as a video game critic with that playthrough, because I am very uninterested in what happened. I don't think what actually happens in the game makes enough sense. A lot of stuff is just not spelled out well enough for me to understand it, and it just feels like there's a lot of plotting mistakes, loopholes, things like that, plot holes. And as I've continuously been criticizing things and trying to criticize things one at a time, one specific puzzle, one specific scene at a time, and not just be generic in my criticism, a better thoughts have just come to mind. So effectively, I've made suggestions where this is how I would do it, and because they're my ideas, they feel better than what was actually done. A small example of that is that I spent like 10 minutes thinking about this and doing a little bit of research. There was a commentary about the creative process. We were in front of a bar called Vanitti, Vanitti, or maybe 1T, doesn't really matter. And the commentary from Dave Gilbert, the creator of the game series at least, says, "Here's my creative process on the name of this bar. I was sitting in a coffee shop, I looked out the window, and I saw a van. And that's my creative process." Which is insane to even admit. But it is very much in line with what I kind of think of Dave Gilbert, as he seems to very much have a stream of consciousness style of creating his games, and can often be very vapid and free form in his decisions, and there just isn't a lot of thought or planning or consideration to it in what he does very often. Apparently, COVID-19 was an actual game that was released. That's crazy. Steam would allow a game just called COVID-19, but whatever. So then I spent about 20 minutes thinking, what would I name this bar? Just as a contrast, off the top of my head, in front of an audience. And there is a important organization in the Blackwell organization called the Grace Group. This really isn't spoiling too much. And so you have a group called the Grace Group. And so from that, I was thinking we should probably have a red herring where the name of the bar means the opposite of grace. Well, I don't inherently know what the opposite of grace would be, what word that would be, off the top of my head. So I spend about 5 minutes pulling out my cell phone, Googling it, and I type in the opposite of grace. Second link takes me to a list of words. I go down the list of words. There's about 3 different definitions of grace. In this case, the definition I was looking for is more of a biblical grace, in that the people have been blessed, not a grace as in you move smoothly or you act with manners, something like that. So I go down the list, and yeah, after a couple minutes, I find the word disgrace, which should have probably come to my head immediately, but certainly as you're just thinking things, particularly for me, who's not good at remembering vocabulary words, it did not come to my head immediately. So yeah, I found disgrace by spending maybe 5 minutes just going through a thesaurus, looking for antonyms, words that mean the opposite of the word grace. And club disgrace or bar disgrace is, in my opinion, again, it's my thought, so obviously I'm going to think it's better, is way better of a name to name this club as a red herring, like it might be the location that is the bad guys hangout or something, when it could just be instead a funny coincidence and the writer playing with the player of the game, teasing them, which would have worked absolutely perfectly because the bar is where a pimp is running prostitution out of it. So Club Disgrace would make a lot of sense, and it used to be a cabaret bar in the past, so it could have been Club Miss Grace, or with a D replacing the M at some point. And you could definitely write plot and dialogue that says it used to be called Miss Grace's Club, and then we decided to make it more edgy in the 90s and changed it to Club Disgrace. And yeah, I think that's a better idea because it led to more being done with it than just naming your bar Vantini because you saw a van and then the name not meaning anything. There is maybe a martini glass you see in the bar, and that's about the only thing you could say, is maybe it's a hint, a very subconscious hint to pay attention to the martini glass, but I wouldn't even say it was that much. And if it was that much, then why have the creator of the game not claim that in the commentary? Since the commentary is being made after the fact that the game has been made, he easily has every opportunity to big up himself and lie and make himself seem a lot smarter than he is. And I guess I applaud him for his honesty, but he is so honest it's to the point of self-deprecation, and it certainly doesn't, even though he's honest in his commentary, or at least seems like he is, it doesn't cover up the fact that there is still just a level of arrogance there to have director's commentary. But since Blackwell Epiphany is the 5th game in the series, maybe the arrogance was 5 games ago. Maybe it made sense 2 and 5 games ago, and he just got painted into a corner and then just kept having to do commentary. But I don't know. I think you could have stopped at any time you had wanted to, and that would have been fine by most players. Yeah, I definitely am not really at the point where I would suggest playing the Blackwell games. If you are going to play them, you don't play the commentary. Don't try to get achievements. Try to go through it very quickly, and know that you're going to have an average experience at best. Blackwell games, as point-and-click adventure games, are kind of not point-and-click adventure games, and really I think would have done better if they were more visual novel games, because it is more about the characters and the conversation by far than it is about picking up items and moving around. But yeah, it's been too much time, frankly, now playing the Blackwell series, and I'm ready to be done with it. And yeah, move on to something else, which I'm also still decluttering and cleaning my house, although mostly I'm going through photos. Which, yeah, sorting photos is kind of awkward. Old family photos of people you barely may recognize. It's interesting, this is not loading. Let's reload the page, see if that helps. There's a weird thing about Firefox too, that when I hit the reload button, it doesn't want to really reload immediately. And sometimes it doesn't really reload at all. But yeah, it says it's reloading, but I usually have to come over here and right click this. I just have no idea why this is running so poorly, other than I know the RAM is not overclocked. But it was running fine before, and I can't even blame it on having a bunch of tabs open, because I don't have a bunch of tabs open. I've been running my macro to close tabs and save everything I need to make YouTube shorts later. Which, yes, my channel should be back to pushing out YouTube shorts, although I'm not sure any of them are really going to be advertised by YouTube app by itself, which is probably fine by me. But certainly you can see it from following the notifications. And I only got one thing to load. Interesting. What if we were... I'm not even going to worry about this. I'm just going to move on. Yeah, the notifications via my Discord are still really the only place you would likely get notifications, or through my RSS feed in the description. That's going to be even faster if you wanted notifications for everything that's coming out on my channel. But most people, I bet, don't even really want that. I've also, on my Discord, got specifically video game sales, and the only thing there is that the way I've got it set up has this enforced 20-minute delay. So a Slick Deals sale for a video game that comes through my Discord feed of the Deals channel, being 20 minutes away, may be too delayed, and it may just be 100% sold out always, regardless of what the deal is. But it is faster, certainly, of an experience to go through the sales by only looking at video game sales than going through the official front page RSS feed of Slick Deals, where you have to skim through several other things on sale. For instance, I believe we're close to Memorial Day, and there looks like there is a mattress on sale on Slick Deals for about half off for like a Memorial Day sale. Which, okay, if you're in the market for a mattress, that could be a good deal. Who knows what the quality of mattresses really are, but all of a sudden you run into some real situations there. The foam mattresses and the way they're made are still chemically very hazardous, so I just don't think even a somewhat simplistic process of making foam for a mattress could be brought into the United States to avoid tariffs. And so if you're getting a $300 mattress, let's say that's about an average price of a cheap mattress, and then there's 150% tariff on it, that then becomes like a $1,000 mattress, and that's way too expensive for most people to spend on a mattress, or way more than most people want to spend on a mattress that is just a cheap foam mattress. But even at that, I just don't think you're gonna all of a sudden have pop-up shops trying to make foam mattresses inside the United States because of chemical reasons and health and safety reasons. So yeah, now might be a decent time to take a mattress sale if you're anywhere close to thinking you need one. Steam Decks, unfortunately not on sale, refurbished at least. We should go to the front page actually and check and see if the regular non-refurbished ones are in stock. But yeah, particularly with this latest Steam Deck update, SteamOS update, there is a decent thought that we'll not see refurbs in sale ever again. Well, maybe we'll see them, but they will just be in very small numbers. Is there a link from this page to get to go back to the non-refurbed? Yes. Here. If that wants to load. I was trying to get my Steam Deck to go to the preview channel. There is the main channel, or the stable channel as they call it. There is the beta channel, which is slightly newer but a little bit more buggy. And then the preview channel is basically just as buggy and as new as possible. So yeah, you can buy them new at the moment, and so far the prices have not changed. Yeah, and weirdly, with the way the tariffs have been going and being implemented, everybody I think is just waiting for somebody else to catch the blame for being the first person to start raising prices quite a bit. Nintendo being excluded from that conversation, as far as Nintendo probably doesn't care if people are upset and yelling at them for price gouging because of tariffs. That being said, Trump did just imply he was planning on putting a 50% tariff on the entirety of the European Union. So yeah, once again we're losing perhaps trade partners or getting increased taxes, or however you want to look at it, or just negotiating and playing bluff, maybe. That being said, for video games, I'm not sure if there's too much. Fantasy Life I is all the way up to the second spot, and it just jumped up there. Wow, so people are really loving that game. Apparently. Yeah, as far as video games go, there are some game makers, certainly in the European Union, but there really isn't a lot of hardware coming through the European Union in any way. I don't think there's any real components. Now, there is one thing in the European Union, I believe. It is the only manufacturer, as far as I understand it, of the lithography technology, and it's, I believe, in Germany. There's one company that makes this lens type device called for lithography, and these lenses are magnifiers that are super precise, and it is how the chip makers at TSMC make their gold wafers that they make the chips on. So if that was all of a sudden tariffed, although it really wouldn't be tariffed too much, it would just stop or make it more expensive to build a chip manufacturing plant inside the United States. It wouldn't affect the rest of the world really too much. So yeah, video game wise, I think most people will be minorly affected by any trade wars with the European Union and the United States. Every other category might be affected way more. Okay. You can see even my interstitials here seem to have gotten out of order. And I don't know what's triggering this, that all of a sudden it gets out of order. And it kind of feels like it would be in the right order for a little bit of time, and then it starts to just get wild. So Video Games Chronicle news is what we normally would be looking at, and instead we're just going to have it all mixed together. Oh, and I probably should mention, I probably have a couple of things I've still not mentioned. I was able to get into my follow list for a brief second, and maybe that's why my computer is running really slow right now, but probably not. But I was able to get into my follow list, and from that follow list I was able to see that it's showing me that I had followed only 2,000 games. So I don't know why it says I'm following 8,000 games, although it is somewhat plausible that maybe 6,000 extra games are technically in the follow list, but they have all been removed from Steam and thus are being hidden from me. Although it doesn't seem like that's really how the follow list works. Or there was some kind of glitch where the follow list is only showing me the first 2,000 games, and then it's got another 6,000 hidden in its database somewhere. That is also a possibility. So anyways, I got into my follow list, and so I stupidly tried to open all 2,000 games, and my computer locked up trying to do that. So yes, I cannot open 2,000 tabs of Steam pages, but I was able to recover and reboot Firefox, or restart the Firefox program, and go through a few games, maybe 100 at most, and remove more things from the follow list. But now I can't get back into the follow list, so it is just going to seemingly take a while to slowly try and get everything off the follow list, which is what I'm trying to do, is just very much put more things on the wish list, even if I'm not actually going to buy it. Immediately I'm going to have to do a wish list cleanup after I get the follow list completely emptied and fixed. But in the future, this problem should be solved, and we won't have to do it ever again, or I won't have to do it. I'm doing it off screen. There's no reason to streaming me struggling with pages trying to load. And I probably could have opened the 2000 tabs had I changed the plugin I was using to open all the links to delay not 10 seconds per opening, but 20 or 30 seconds, so that there was just a very long buffer. Then I would have to go to sleep, and then, yeah, 30 seconds times 2000 would be probably several hours of it slowly opening each page. Gamatsu says, Fantasy Life I, the girl who steals time, free DLC update The World has been announced. There was a slick deals for a game that was going to be delisted from Steam, and so the whole game is just free at the moment, and the soundtrack is free, which feels weird, certainly, to have a situation like that where, like, I'm clicking on where it thinks the link is and it's not reacting. Maybe it finally did. But yeah, the idea of something being delisted and thus they're selling it for free feels weird. The only thing I could think is that this is some weird thing the publisher is doing or the developer is doing because they're changing publishers. While that loads, Zenless Zone 0 version 2.0 update, where the clouds embrace the dawn, launches June 6. And that is from Gamatsu. Yeah. Just overwhelmingly positive of a game. And now there is edition upgrade. That is $13.99, so that is not the DLC. That they're giving out some kind of gift codes in their recent events and announcements. Crafts and Meister announces a casual party game called Blokes on Blokes for PC. Sounds like a British game if I was to guess. Yeah. Might have a mistake here on my plugin where I'm closing the old tabs and keeping the new ones, which makes a lot of sense, but when things are really slow like this, that may be just slowing things down more. That game does not look interesting to me at all, so we'll move on. Pop You Come. I'm not sure how else you would pronounce that for PC, launches June 1st. Pop You Come? Not come. Yeah. Still awkward name. Yeah. So I guess I have to assume that while this loads, I'll make some assumptions, that the Video Games Chronicle step, the very first step, is what failed. Right, and here's another thing that's on my wish list that I can now move away from my wish list. Basically, I'm trying to get everything to be just checkboxed, and then I'm going to eventually just have to open up every single thing that has like May in its name as far as being a local storage cookie and do a monthly cleanup that way. And I might very well make yet another macro that will then become yet another baby that has to be fed and maintained all the time, that will do a monthly cleanup. See, this interstitial for Gaming on Linux is somewhat accurate, but then Gaming on Linux still feels like it's not opening the right amount of articles. I also believe it might be the case that I have not been looking at all of the new games that have been coming out on Steam, and that I've actually only been looking at the first 100 games. which is not my intention and would be very unfair and would just cause problems in the long run. So I'm gonna try to make sure that never happens. But yeah, Gaming on Linux says Star Vaders is a deck building meets grid based tactics game and is basically perfect. Yeah. A lot of video games effectively could be board games, but they have that extra audio, that extra flash, and thus they are competing on a very different level. And that's what's always weird about some of the Asmodee digital games that are just digital versions of board games, in that there often is not that much polish. You don't get any extra animations or visuals from Asmodee digital or music, things you might expect. Fanatical's latest Capcom Legends bundle has some good picks for cheap, which, yeah. Right now I'm too busy still just trying to settle in buying real world stuff to start thinking about buying video games. Plus I haven't played anywhere enough video games that I would need to buy new video games. First link on that was Devil May Cry, so here we can see Devil May Cry 5 being highlighted and overwhelmingly positive. So I guess if I was going to buy that through Fanatical, that might be a deal. It's been a while though, like 2019, 6 years since this came out, and I don't really expect we're going to see a Devil May Cry 6 anytime soon. We haven't heard any announcements or indication that something like that might happen. And in the era right now of better graphics over everything else, I'm not sure a Devil May Cry 6 would even make sense. It wouldn't inherently, I think, have the ability to have much drastically better graphics without compromising on the speed of play in a Devil May Cry game and the number of enemies in a Devil May Cry game. Let's see, Dune Awakening is going to have BattleEye enabled for Linux, SteamOS, and Steam Deck. I assume BattleEye is an anti-cheat, which that kind of news, it might be very good, because it might be one more example people can push to say, hey, you can have anti-cheat and still put your game on Linux. So quit using that as an excuse to not port your game to Linux. Although the better excuse to not port your game to get Linux is still there just isn't that many people playing on it. One of the things about the announcement for the latest version of SteamOS is that they're starting to publicly announce that they're going to try and work with some OEM manufacturers, probably still focused on handhelds, to get SteamOS on more handheld devices or computers. But maybe by this time next year we will have full-on desktop PCs that also have SteamOS on them. I could see a lot of computers on the show floor at a place like Computex just having SteamOS on them, just because that will make it more interesting to show things off, and it would mean that they actually wouldn't have to license Windows. Apparently Warhammer 40k Mechanicus 2 gets its first trailer, and you can get a free copy of Gladius. Okay. Is there a link to the Gladius part there? Or how do you get the free copy? Plus you can get a free copy of Warhammer 40k Gladius, Relics of War to keep, and the original Mechanicus has a big discount. See, I don't know why these links aren't open. What did I change that made such a drastic change. Yeah, I wasn't doing any testing today, and I probably should have. But yeah. All of these links should be open already. I don't see a link to Gladius anywhere on Mechanicus's page, and it doesn't have an announced release date, so it's yet another thing I can take off the follow list. Here's all the games you can claim for Steam Deck and Linux for the Prime Gaming as of May 23rd. Yeah. Awkwardly try and scroll down this list, which, and I'm just in dire straits where even my mouse scrolling does not really want to run well. And I did check to see if somehow something was taking up all my RAM, and it's not that. So I have no idea what's really going on right now. Multiple Warhammer games entered the Good Old Games preservation program, and so now, and some games are now exclusive to Good Old Games. These apparently are co-published by Good Old Games, so they say you will not find them anywhere else, which kind of sucks that now a precedent has been set that there will just be these Good Old Games exclusives for games, and not just Good Old Games versions, but Good Old Games, or games in general that are exclusive to Good Old Games. It's not the end of the world for me, because I'm pretty sure all of these Warhammer 40k games are mid quality at best, but if you're a Warhammer 40k fan and you did like these old games, you're now forced to use Good Old Games, which is something most people want to try to avoid, splitting their game libraries between multiple stores. Let's see. Warhammer 40k Space Marine and Warhammer 40k Dawn of War are getting remasters also, so clearly there was a Warhammer announcement presentation that happened. I don't have a major amount of confidence, though, that any of these games would be any better, even remastered. I don't know if I really even have any confidence that they would be any better if they were remade. Let's see, Splitgate 2 gets a beta on Steam, and it works now on the Steam Deck, but no other, it doesn't work on other Linux systems for now. Weirdly, only working on Steam. That game I talked about earlier, I tried to run that on the Steam Deck, the Signals of Elohim, which is just a little Tetris minigame thing, and weirdly it doesn't work. You'd think something like that would have a high chance of working and not being difficult, although perhaps it is difficult because it might be programmed in the Sirius engine, and most of the compatibility programming from Proton focuses more on more common game engines like the Unreal Engine. Yeah, maybe that's the case. So that's probably not a great way, though, to try and shop for games if you're looking for games that might run on the Steam Deck and you can't use something like the Steam compatibility charts. Like, I just don't think you would start looking at games by their engine and what are the odds that an engine would be supported. I don't think that statement is even going to prove true as a thought. Apparently a deck builder meets auto shooter in Hordes of Fate, a Hand of Fate adventure. The demo live now. Interesting. Hand of Fate 2 was too difficult of a game for me and fairly repetitive of what the first game was. I think Hand of Fate had an interesting concept that perhaps was just not implemented as good as it really should. Perhaps there's some similarity in that, once again, it is mostly a tabletop game to start with, and then it has just a lot of flashy animation, and then has you engage in fights. Hand of Fate 1 and 2 do. Is this gonna unfollow? Probably never. So I almost wonder if this is a spin-off game made by a completely different team. Yeah. The card art in Hand of Fate is somewhat unique. Yeah. I can't help but feel, looking at the screen though, that you're basically just playing something like Diablo, and you have 5 spells in the middle of your screen in the form of cards. Let's see. Drop Ducky, or Duchy, is the inevitable mixture of Tetris with deck building and combat. Which I guess deck building at this point is getting a little too hot. We're seeing a little too many games with deck building elements, and yeah, that looks a little bit weird. Like, that's gonna start becoming redundant. Too many deck builders out there. The MSI Claw handheld looks like it may be getting better Linux support. A new draft patch series for the Linux kernel has been submitted, which should hopefully bring up extended support for the MSI Claw handheld. I don't think I really would suggest much about the MSI Claw. I haven't heard people talking about it. One of the devices that I saw, though, had like touchpads that were fairly low down here in its form factor. Obviously it wasn't the MSI Claw, and when I started to think about it, that probably would kill your fingers. You would have to be able to have grips that moved your thumb way lower to touch the touchpads. It's just not likely to be a natural thing. So yeah, run into the danger of something like a Nintendo Switch controller where the buttons are just too linear, too close together. The controllers are just too small. Oh, I should say, I did get a 8-bit controller with Hall effect triggers and nice features like that. Took it out of the box, held it in my hand, and then put it back in the box. And I'm going to give it away because it's slightly too small for my big fat old person hands. There is something very nice about the Xbox controllers, and arguably maybe the Xbox controllers themselves are still maybe a little small, but anything smaller than an Xbox controller, even by a little bit, is just too small for me. They just don't feel comfortable to me, and it is definitely a comfort issue. So I would hope that the 8-bit controller is fine in quality and with Hall effect sensors it should be, and I only got it for like 15 bucks, so it was a pretty good deal. But now I am effectively just going to give it away, so not very much of a deal. And I guess that's the problem with buying controllers in general, is that if you don't have one in your hand, you're not going to really have a good sense of what it feels like. You may get measurements that might help you know the size, but the actual feel in hand, based on the materials and the curves, is still something that would really require you to hold on to it. And that is why I've been mostly sticking to Xbox Core controllers, even though the prices are going up and up and up on those, just because I know what that feels like, and I know it's the right size for my hands, or at least the best controller I've found so far for my hands. Weirdly, it is weird that I cannot name off the top of my head a controller that is designed to be even larger than the Nintendo controller. There are accessibility controllers that are larger, obviously, but nothing that's just like 10%, 5% larger than a standard Xbox. Although, if you did need it larger like that, and it was only 5%, you could probably just get a really thick wrap and like shell to go over an Xbox controller to make it slightly bigger. Gaming on Link says the 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless controller is a top premium feeling controller. Coincidentally, I was just talking about 8BitDos. And yeah, unless I'm subconsciously somehow reading the title from the tab headlines, that just, I think, randomly happens. And honestly, I don't think I could even be subconsciously reading the titles from the headlines, because the only word that's visible right now is the THE, and then it's too squished to show anything else. But yeah, it's easy to overlook that it is slightly smaller, these 8BitDo controllers, but yeah, I think the one I got definitely is smaller. Definitely felt smaller. And speaking of slick deals, I got a new toothbrush, or perhaps personal massager pretending to be a toothbrush, that has a docking station and a magnetic inductor charger, which is interesting. What surprised me though is that when I went to use it, it was just vibrating like crazy. Just like, I think it's 4,400 vibrations per minute is what it sells itself as, and it's just like, okay, this goes back and forth or left and right, basically. I think it just kind of goes left and right a tiny distance, which I'd been using cheaper head spinning models that would spin the heads of the toothbrush, but much slower, and yeah, the toothbrush is overall are stubbier and shorter than what the one I've got now. So far I am shocked that it's so powerful, and we'll see what it can do as far as how I feel about it in like 6 months or so. But yeah, if you told me it was just a very cheap motor that just spins as fast as possible and there's no other thought behind it than that, I'd probably believe you. It does have 5 settings though, although it's not like a smart toothbrush, and we really haven't gotten to the point where I think anybody really wants a Bluetooth toothbrush that sends off data to say how long you've been brushing, so you can keep records, or so they can raise the insurance on you. More likely the latter. There is something about the toothbrush though that it might be very cheap, in that it does sometimes just seem like it pauses for a second. And I thought, oh, maybe the vibrations pause for a second to say, you've done one side and it's been 30 seconds, do the next quarter of your mouth for like a 2-minute brush or whatever. But then the timing seems to be way random, so I don't think it's intentional. It may be that it is just a piece of junk, which that would be a shame if that's the case. If it breaks, like, that's the big thing, is it going to break? Is the internal battery, if it has a battery at all, it might have a supercapacitor, is that going to wear out? So it's just going to be a long-term test for me. I'm slowly trying to convert everything I have to be black in my bathroom instead of your typical white or otherwise a specific color, just to hide the occasional water spot and not try and have to make everything as perfectly clean as you might want to for something that is pure white. Although you still want things pretty clean in the bathroom as far as toothbrushes and soap dishes and things like that. I also saw a soap dish that, for a bar of soap, holds it at an angle in the air. So you suction cup it to the side of your sink, you take the bar of soap, wash your hands with it if you are not using liquid soap, and then you put the wet bar of soap in the cup in the holder, and all the water drains out and into the sink as it dries. Let's talk about video games though. Ninja Action RPG Adventure Katana Dragon recently added Linux and Steam Deck support. Okay. And see, it almost seems like we're going to be done with the Gaming on Linux articles, which is interesting. So yeah, the SteamOS version 3.7.7 beta brings battery charge limit option and improved Lenovo Legion Go S support. I think this has already been superseded though, where they put it out basically a day ago, and now they have an official 3.7.8 I think version that is on the stable channel. So maybe they only needed like a day of testing and that was it. I wanted to go from the beta to the preview channel, but like my Steam Deck doesn't seem to want to do that. And probably modified it too much for their taste, if I was to guess. Here's that game Katana Dragon, which just came out in March. Make a YouTube short on it. Now bring us to GameDeveloper.com, and that too still seems like it's in the right order. But I'm not even going to try and use the Adjusterify stuff. It looks like all of these articles might be old articles from GameDeveloper.com. So I'm just going to close these really quickly, and it's probably not going to help with anything. But yeah, those look like those are all old articles. And see, this is where I think it messed up, where it wanted to open something, a tab called undefined, and I think that was the beginning of it messing up in a different way at the very least. So I need to figure out what's going on there, because now this brings us back to Gematsu articles, and in this case Kajora launching September 4th has Kajora on Steam, which just looks slightly interesting to me. So I actually would like it to put it on the fall list, but I'm just not doing any of that right now. And then Shoot in Order launches September 5th. And if things want to work, this is also open. But then it starts going in the wrong order. So we're back to gaming on Linux with the Lenovo Legion Go S with SteamOS now listed for purchase in the UK. I guess way you have to get it is through Lenovo directly. I don't think the Z1 Extreme actually can run SteamOS. I'm not sure. Leave it at that. PlayStation spins out a new internal studio from Bungie. Employees at the new studio previously worked on Destiny, Halo, Fortnite, and League of Legends. I think we had already talked about that. That was from GameDeveloper.com. Sony's next PlayStation State of Play will reportedly be coming in June. The publisher has been trying to decide whether to present a showcase or a State of Play, it's claimed. Well, any hint at indecision shows weakness, I would say. Gematsu says Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater opening movie Delta version is available here if you want to check it out. And this is another game. Once again, that we can take off the fall list. It is all being way too slow, and I really just don't feel like it was this slow until I started streaming, so I think I got a little bamboozled here. Now, one of the things that was weird, since there was so many fewer people at the meetup, is that I really didn't get to talk to anybody I talked to at the first meeting, which is a shame, but I guess it does also help keep it a little bit more varied, except for the coordinators, which were the same people. And really, I unfortunately am only really talking to one of the coordinators, and I would probably like to have equal relationships with all of the coordinators. Or at least try to. But yeah, it feels like I accidentally or unintentionally snubbed some people by not talking to them. But that was not my intention at all. Inherently, because it was tabletop gaming, if people don't come to you while you're playing a game, it's fairly hard to go to them. Although that's true for video games also. The whole system, again, it probably needs to be more like a speed dating type thing where the coordinators are just asking people to come join games and move around and shuffle and talk to each other more. I feel like it's probably more of a case where I just need like business cards and just do the whole Japanese business card exchange thing, where this first time you meet anyone, you actually hand them a business card, as weird as that is, to say, here's my email, here's my Discord, here's how you can contact me, let's give this a go, and try to have a relationship that involves a lot of online digital communication, because most people are communicating a lot online, whether that's good for people or not. It just tends to be really the case, and a lot of people certainly just don't want to give you phone numbers or personal emails anyways. So yeah, that's why I'm also hot on the idea of making my Discord more of a central location where I can communicate with people, is to say, hey, well, if I control the Discord, I'm not going to get spammed with text messages or emails or anything. Email, particularly Gmail at the moment, is almost dying because of the limitations of the amount of size you can have in a Gmail. Anyways, moving on. We're back to Video Games Chronicles. To celebrate Pac-Man's 45th anniversary, Bandai Namco reveals Shadow Labyrinth's Maze sections. Bandai Namco's sci-fi take on Pac-Man is a 2D action platformer. So you'd be very confused, I think, if you just saw that screenshot. And I don't know if this is going to play at all. This game, Shadow Labyrinth, is crazy. That you'd have like this AI that is like a Pac-Man in what looks very much like a Metroidvania game. The quote-unquote young lady at the meetup that I was talking to said the last video game she played was Miss Pac-Man, so she really wasn't much of a gamer. But that was enough to tell her about what I funnily remembered about the whole legal rambling around Miss Pac-Man and Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. But yeah, there's still fighting, I guess, or upsetness by Bandai Namco around Miss Pac-Man, and I still don't think there's a single collection of Pac-Man games that includes Miss Pac-Man. The arcade version, at least. A Elden Ring live-action film has been announced by, this is a Gematsu article, produced by A24, which I don't know if I can say anything good or bad about A24. Really, some of their movies I think might be good passion projects, but I think some of their movies are very much just designed to make a quick buck. And so who knows what the Elden Ring movie would be all about. Inherently, you would sell this movie saying, well, George R.R. Martin wrote the story for Elden Ring, even if he really didn't, and thus you're getting a George R.R. Martin movie, probably for the cheap. And I think people liked the story of Elden Ring. I didn't hear anybody actually ever explain it or sing its praises too much, but for the story that you would need in a game like Elden Ring, it more than likely was good enough. They did a lot of teasers and trailers around what the story was implied to be for Elden Ring before it launched, but most of the people singing its praises, I think, were really more singing the praises of the gameplay. You can try out the Steam playtest for Gobu Tico and become the greatest dice rolling goblin merchant. Yeah. That's already open, so I don't need to click on the link. Yeah. One of the things about moving to Firefox on my Steam Deck, I know I'm bouncing all around today. Today's been a bad day. Fridays often are bad days of just staying on topic. But anyways, if you install Firefox, Firefox wants you to potentially sign in and sync your browser tabs and activity between like using it on your phone if you're using it on your phone and at different computers. And I just don't think that would be the case. The Steam Deck just doesn't need the same tabs to be open and the same extensions to be installed, or even passwords to be synced between it. So I definitely would not sign in and sync things. I'll just keep it all local. Hopefully all the passwords and things are being kept local and separate and unique. I feel like a lot of these stories we've already covered. Like, we know that the FTC has finally dropped its fight with the Activision Blizzard deal. Didn't succeed at all. A game called Rat Shaker is coming to the PS5 on May 28th. It's a first-person pest control simulator. Apparently it has a link on Steam. I'll be shocked if this is actually something I've seen before. While we're looking at that, we have more GameDeveloper.com articles not worth mentioning. And then Video Games Chronicle says 4 more Game Boy games, including Kirby Puzzler, have been added to the Nintendo Switch Online. I saw a YouTuber claim that this was the last 4 Game Boy games, that all the other Game Boy games have been brought to the Switch Online. And that definitely can't be true. But maybe they were trying to imply it was the last 4 good Game Boy games before the month ends. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a ton of Game Boy games, not even including Game Boy Color. Now this game, Survival Kids, has me slightly interested. As a Game Boy game, color game, it's got to be a pretty old game. Yeah, and this is clearly something closer to a Pokemon game as far as like an RPG thing. Really, it's just kids surviving on a desert beach. Than what you would think of as far as a modern survival game where it's just doing a bunch of grinding. Yeah, I don't really care about these other games. So I'm not gonna sit here and watch the rest of this trailer, but yeah. Survival Kids. Kind of shocking that there was a game called Survival Kids, although it really wouldn't have been that shocking. There were all kinds of stories. I mean, it really is just the expansion on the idea of being a pirate without the piracy, and all kinds of Robinson Crusoe, I guess, is a better comparison, stories where people think they could live on a desert island, or like to fantasize, or they used to like to fantasize of living on a desert island and coming out great for it, when in reality, if you were stranded on a desert island, you would probably starve to death or die of some mosquito infection disease before you started to really thrive there. Here's that game Rat Shaker, which is on Steam, and yet it's not on my wish list, even though it's overwhelmingly positive. So I'm gonna just go ahead and put it on my wish list, but I'm not gonna. Well, no, I do have a good excuse to make a YouTube short right now, since it's coming to a new console, so I'll do that. Embracer, and this is from Gaming on Linux of all companies, of all websites, is going to spin off Coffee Stain and then rebrand as Fellowship Entertainment and release 76 games in the next year, which is, from the title, a very ambitious thing to claim, but questionable whether I really believe Embracer could do that, because Embracer has basically failed in whatever it was trying to attempt by acquiring a bunch of companies, then selling those companies at what feels like a loss, and maybe acquiring a bunch of IP and keeping the IP, but then not really having a team to do anything with the IP, and not really having enough good intellectual property to actually make profit off of that. So the entirety of Embracer, and whatever it really was called before Embracer, I forget the name, I think it was THQ Nordic, or it was Nordic Games, and then they changed it to THQ Nordic, and then they spin off THQ Nordic for a parent company called Embracer. But yeah, there's over the lifetime of this company been very little games actually released and very little success and just a ton of money spent. They acquired Gearbox only to then turn around and sell Gearbox back. Well, sell Gearbox to 2K. It was a private company originally. And so yeah, the promise of 76 games from anybody is hard to really believe. And I can't help but wonder if they are just desperately trying to get people to invest in their company before they run out of cash. 76 games in the next year. That's insane. There are 52 weeks out of the year, so they're planning on releasing a new game on average more than one per week, cannibalizing their own sales almost certainly. At a certain point, you just have to assume they're making up numbers. Let's see, Metal Gear Solid Delta opening cinematic debuts a new version of the Snake Eater theme. This is from Video Games Chronicle. Chrono Odyssey developer interview #1, Building a World Beyond Time, featuring a first look of in-game footage, is available on Gamatsu if you wanted to watch that developer interview. Seems like Chrono Odyssey is going to put out interviews and promote itself a lot, which I think it kind of has to because it is an MMO online game that feels like it's going to involve time travel at the very beginning, and then you're just going to be in the past when you're playing the game always. SAG-AFTRA publicly releases its proposed AI terms to end the strike. I think this is old news. Again from GameDeveloper.com. Ex Machina director Alex Garland is going to helm the Elden Ring movie for A24. George R.R. Martin will serve as a producer for the film, which being named a producer can mean anything basically. What would be interesting here if you were to try and scroll through this and get the details would be if they announced that it was being shot outside of the United States, and thus because it was being filmed outside the United States, a tariff is going to affect it potentially, and then the whole movie is going to somehow be taxed so much that tickets prices would go up quite a bit, which I guess that's how a Hollywood or a non-Hollywood, non-United States made movie tariff would work, is that the importing aspect would be production happening outside of the United States. But even that wouldn't really be a tariff though. So only if, I guess, the film itself, the actual digital film, which almost certainly all movies nowadays are digital film unless they're being shot on IMAX film, somehow they're going to try and impose a digital tariff, I guess, which they have no way of imposing digital tariffs. So yeah, I have no idea how that works. I don't think anybody does. So yeah, if this does feel like the kind of movie you would go to some place like Iceland or maybe in Europe to film, not the United States. The Corpse Party Tetralogy Pack has been announced for Switch, 4 games in 1. And I will just scroll down here. Corpse Party is always a weird title to say out loud, but apparently it sells well enough that they keep making the games, and it is received well enough that they keep making the games. That is one of those games that maybe would be a little bit not YouTube family friendly, so maybe I would never get to cover it. It is also just a game that I think is somewhat of a horror-based visual novel type game, so I don't think it actually is a visual novel type game. I think it's more of a I think it is more of a RPG maker type game. Limited edition version of it includes a 4-episode OVA, original video animation, which sometimes is also called an OAV, original animation video. Corpse Party Tortured Souls on Blu-ray disc. And see, if they stop making Blu-ray disc movies, then limited editions for games that have any kind of connection to any kind of Blu-ray disc movies are no longer going to be a thing that can be made. Oh, I guess it's also important to point out which version of Corpse Party is being released here. It's the 2021 re-release, remaster release, not the original one. I think the Corpse Party original one has been out for maybe about 10 years earlier than that at least. And that's definitely another series that probably is way more popular and well known in the United States. I mean, in Japan compared to the West. Yeah. Let's see. Days Gone Remastered has a new patch which attempts to fix the PS5 Pro issues. PSSR and haptic feedback problems have also been addressed. This is from Video Games Chronicles. Peter Molyneux explains why his infamous Kinect game Project Milo was never released. Molyneux saw Kinect as a gaming device, not a party device, because he didn't want to prance around like a twat. Okay, that doesn't, as a subheadline, directly explain why Project Milo wasn't released. I imagine it wasn't released because it was a lot of smoke and mirrors and maybe about 20 minutes of entertainment. The general idea, if I recall correctly, was that you would have your Xbox 360 here with an extra hard drive plugged into it in this case, and your Kinect device, which was a camera system, which by modern standards is probably not quality at all, but at the time was perhaps revolutionary in this quality, and it had kind of a LiDAR 3D spatial technology to it, so it could actually identify where you were in the room and how far away you were. But you'd have all that set up, and then there would be a boy named Milo, and he'd be talking to you. I think there were microphones also in this, and you'd be talking back. So just like a AI virtual friend, which even in 2025, we're not seeing anybody really promising real-time AI virtual friends. The amount of probably video card RAM you need is still just going to be too high for something to be able to detect what you're saying, understand what you're saying, and respond in any kind of relevant way. This is a heavy evolution on a game that I believe was on the PS2. I think it was called Fishman or something, where you had this like virtual fish and you would yell into the microphone and it would kind of randomly react if it heard sound and randomly evolve. But it was a very weird, surreal game, Fishman was, and so it didn't have that uncanny valley problem, and people weren't really expecting much. Whereas Project Milo, I think, was definitely seemingly going to try to do something. Yeah. So when he did the demo, he was jumping all over the room. I'm a gamer, I don't want to play games standing up. I agree with him on that one, and it's a rare day when I can agree with Peter Molyneux on anything. That's the first thing. doesn't appeal to me. I want to sit back. I want to smoke what I smoke. I want to drink what I drink. And I don't want to prance around like a twat. So, Peter Molyneux, perhaps a bit cranky in his old age. There's a moment where you realize you're crafting, inspiring a human being. Wouldn't it be incredible thing to create a game around that feeling? Wouldn't it be incredible to experience or to create an experience around that? All inspiring. About inspiring, in Milo's case, a boy. That was contingent in itself, but because of course lots of people go to dark side with that idea. So let's skip around here. So effectively this was Peter Molyneux being way too ambitious and trying to make a sun raising simulator, where the Japanese had made games, daughter raising simulators, years before. They just made them 2D and flat and pixely, not something using a Kinect device and voice input and what at the time would have been realistic graphics. The first blow as a Kinect show to him was eventually downgraded significantly. The Kinect that was shown to him was downgraded significantly, affecting the possibilities of the game. Yeah, I imagine he had been shown a prototype Kinect that was way more expensive. Funny thing about the Kinects is that they were using them in casinos for a long time. They may still be using them even now, and they would have custom software on them and have Kinects pointing down at people playing cards to try and catch any cheaters. As they were developing Milo, so the Kinect device was being developed, and they realized that the device that he first showed off would have cost $5,000. So the cost reduced device, they cost reduced the device down to such a point where the field of view, I think it was a minuscule field of view. In other words, it could just see what was straight in front of you. The final death knell in Project Milo, in Molyneux's eyes, however, was when Microsoft decided to make the Kinect as a party device rather than a gaming device. Okay. So yeah, generally I try to avoid reading these articles, but I was somewhat interested in here. This is apparently from E3, many years ago. It means Games Trailer Press Conference, E3. I think this is Peter Molyneux. Let's see. So you can see she's clearly green screened, and the rest of this is recording. The important thing to point out here, though, is that Peter Molyneux also is a very well-known BSer. He's very ambitious, but his games don't really, they really don't deliver on the promises that Peter Molyneux tries to do. And what's funny is the video showed him catching the microphone and the microphone sensing first, but then it stops showing that icon. And this is just like 100% scripted. More than likely she's got a green screen and there's just someone in a green screen suit, you know, telling you face this way, say your next lines. And so, yeah, this is a whole lot of faff. Interesting, they can take her camera image and put it in a reflection as an idea. This is a very British people speaking. So yeah, one of the things about this Milo presentation though is that it's not really showing anything that would be a game, even under the category of a child raising simulator. There are just no heads-up display, there's no interface, there's no numbers, no points. You very well would need to gamify something like this first, and then maybe loosen the gamification to make it feel like a real-world experience. But even in 2025, you could not do what Milo was trying to promise to do. You just not without spending maybe $1 million, because you're going to need a top of the line LiDAR type sensor to position you in the room. You're going to need a good camera to capture your image. You're going to need a large language module for processing what Milo should say. You're going to need massive amounts of GPU to run that large language module, and a lot of CPU, and probably a ton of RAM. So an entire server rack may be needed just to run something like Milo. And at the end of the day, you would have a boring AI chat GPT equivalent of a person, of an avatar looking at you, and it just wouldn't even feel that interesting. Like, it would be the equivalent of taking care of a newborn in the small amount of time in between the periods where newborns are nearly dying. They're very boring. Like, when a newborn is asleep, they don't have anything to say, or if they're just sitting there googling and gagaing, you can't really talk to them. Of course, newborns do keep their parents excited by nearly dying, nearly choking on things, crying for food, things like that, crying for no reason in particular, crying because they're exhausted, which is perhaps counterintuitive. So here we have gaming on Linux, Steam Deck getting a big upgrade to SteamOS 3.7, and you can now install it on other AMD handhelds. So it was 3.7.7 beta, and then somebody pulled the trigger 24 hours later to make it 3.7 stable, which knows how they dropped the third digit in that case. So the numbers between stable and beta aren't even actually consistent. But yeah, I think we've mostly covered all of this. There is a new recovery image, I would assume, with the newest version, and instructions on how to install it now available. This is 3.7.8 is actually the name of it, but it's being called just SteamOS 3.7. So how do you get a situation where one day the beta channel gets the 0.7 and the next day you get 0.8? There's a couple of ways there. Maybe the beta version only needed a little testing, although 1 day of testing always seems like too little. Or maybe the internal production and development had been testing out 3.7.7 for a long time, and they had already fixed all the bugs from 3.7.7 and could just push out 3.8 with such a high level of confidence that they would push it to stable. So yeah, new kernels, new Arch Linux base, desktop mode now having Plasma 6.2.5. There's frame limiting for virtual refresh rate displays, internal and external. One of the big things is a battery charge limit, and I will engage with that and use that just because I'm not using my Steam Deck too much, leaving it at a maximum of 80%, which is what it defaults to, can be helpful. There is very little at this point that would prevent you from at least trying SteamOS on any handheld that might be compatible, and or a computer you built yourself that might be compatible. I guess there is still a question as to how smooth that is going to be. The update to Plasma 6.2.5 is a fairly large jump, but you're still not using the Wayland compositor directly, I think. Yeah, it includes now surround sound working now correctly. Interesting. It's currently only available via desktop mode. It includes Firelight to show disk usage. There are other apps that show disk usage, but you don't really need to, and the one installed by default probably makes the best sense to stick with. In a funny way, I might at some point want to back up my current install and do a fresh install on my Steam Deck, but that'd be a lot of work for probably a little reason. They added GoCrypt FS for the Plasma Vaults feature. Now weirdly, I bet they don't mention that they have added cups as far as printer features. And I did try an app to find the scanning function of my network printer, and I could not find a scanner. So, and the app itself did not seem like I could type in the address of the scanner. Although I could go to my printer's locally hosted webpage and scan that way. But that's really more of a workaround than an actual solution. They've moved to a more standard make swap function instead of shipping with a make swap file script. And then a lot of this is also just unnecessarily complicated stuff. Apparently there's a dedicated RSS feed. I'm going to investigate that later, specifically for SteamOS. Reimage install SteamOS. Install page here has been updated, whereas I feel like this page wasn't getting updated very frequently. And I think the way they do it is it keeps several versions of the Steam OS. So if you accidentally get a bad install, you should be able to roll back to the previous one, or you have a high chance of that, at least. Doesn't feel like the instructions are going to be particularly too detailed. It wants an AMD hardware and an NVMe drive. It doesn't want you to even try to install it if you have a spinning hard drive. Yeah. And it's giving you specific settings to how to get into the BIOS, basically, for other devices like the ROG Ally and the Legion Go Original, which those are the only two handhelds that so far have specific instructions. No mention here if you need to install it. Yes, here it says you must disable secure boot on your device. So you can't do like a secure boot, dual boot to Windows 10 and have SteamOS run, would be my guess. There's probably a very complicated way to pull it off, but I think for us plebeians, there's not going to be a way, which that is going to suck still. If you have a lot of people who might have experimented with SteamOS but are not willing to destroy and delete their Windows install in the process, which maybe it wouldn't actually erase your Windows install, and maybe you just have to enable secure boot and then boot from a different hard drive. Ideally, if you're going to do that, you would just buy a new NVMe, take out whatever NVMe or hard drive has Windows on it, and swap out just your internal storage. I guess that would be the easiest and best way, because then you wouldn't accidentally delete Windows in that case. Right, well, I'm gonna take another bathroom break. It probably won't be particularly too long this time, but I'll pause the recording again. Okay, I'm back. So that was just a short break. I guess technically me leaving a party early because I had to go to the bathroom yesterday is a example of like an IBS like disorder, where your normal desires and activities are being interrupted by having to go to the bathroom too much, and certainly that definitely feels like that's the case. But inherently, since I'm streaming, I'm talking, and because I'm talking, I'm drinking water, and because I'm drinking water, I'm going to the bathroom. It's fairly normal stuff. Also swung by my kitchen and ate some cookies, or more accurately, one giant cookie, part of one giant cookie that I cooked. It's interesting, I've never seen a pan that's like a cupcake pan, but it only has a little bit of divots, where you could potentially have a hydrophobic coating at the top surface, and you would pour the cookie dough, and it would just magically spread into perfectly portioned cookies circles. Although, frankly, if you made a pan like that, it probably would have so many chemicals on it. I saw a video saying that every time you scratch like a Teflon, you're releasing 9,000 microplastics into the air. Although, in fairness, you shouldn't be scratching Teflon. You should always be using a silicone utensil on Teflon anyways, non-stick materials. And we've always known, anybody who was paying attention has always known, that the non-stick pots and pans were never supposed to be over 500 degrees. We're never supposed to be like preheated or cooked on with nothing on it, no liquid, no food to absorb the heat, and they were never supposed to be scratched. So yeah, maybe there's just people have forgotten about that, but that was always the case. Yeah, I baked one giant cookie, again trying applesauce to replace eggs, and it works pretty good. Maybe makes it a little too gooey, because maybe a little more liquid from applesauce turns sugar cookies into kind of applesauce-y sugar cookies. But yeah, I cooked it in a cake pan tin, and so it really fluffed up as like way too gooey in the center, and way too tall of a cookie. Well, I should have split the batch into two 9-inch cake tins, and then it would have been half as tall. But yeah, I don't know what happened. I cooked a cake only a couple days ago, and it's not the fourth cake I had to throw away. Thank goodness for that. It just fluffed up way more than any of the others, and so it overcooked the edges, made a bit of a mess. But the cake itself tastes fine, so not really too much to complain there. Just had to do a little bit of cleaning, which there's always something to clean, isn't there? Alright, I'm supposed to be talking about video games though, and here I'm rambling on about cooking. Which, yes, that's part of why I'm trying to have so many different channels on my Discord, is I have a whole bunch of different things that interest me for a brief second in my ADHD way of thinking. And I really need to stay on topic and better when streaming, making content. Apparently Tencent is spending $1.8 billion for a 25% of Ubisoft's spinoff. I think the name of the spin-off subsidiary is in particular really funny. That's about $559 million of that $1.8 billion will go right back to Ubisoft. But yeah, it definitely feels like there's an attempt here to spin off either the good parts or the bad parts of Ubisoft and leave the rest of it alone. I think the Guillemot family is probably going to try and jump ship to the spin-off company. But it might be that they're just trying to place a bunch of debt into this subsidiary and lose debt themselves that way. Or it might be that this is actually political, even, in that Tencent is really just giving $1.16 billion to Ubisoft and had to find some way to justify it for accounting reasons. Yeah, the GameDeveloper.com has a headline: "Is Ubisoft having a metaphorical baby to preserve the metaphorical marriage to Tencent?" Who knows? It'll be interesting to see what the final chapter of Ubisoft is, if it is anywhere close to its final chapter, but it may very well just be a fairly boring couple of years in which they don't make enough money and then they slowly just sell themselves off and get smaller and smaller. Although I wouldn't be surprised if the country of France just does everything in its power to keep Ubisoft in business. Although maybe the country of France would instead invest in other game companies in France instead. They definitely don't want to lose even Ubisoft, since Ubisoft is one of the biggest game companies. And if Ubisoft leaves France, Revolution Software is the next company that I know of that's a French company, and I'm not even 100% certain it is a French company. And Revolution Software, no, I think actually is a UK company, now that I think about it. So yeah, I don't know for certain another French company at all that makes video games. Whoever just made Clair Obscur Expedition 33 may be a French company, almost certainly are. And so they may be the new darling. And so you might see a lot of people jumping ship from Ubisoft to that company that made Clair Obscur, if such a thing is possible. Video Games Chronicles still talking about Pokemon way too much. The life-size Pokemon plushies for Umbreon and Espeon are out now. I think we looked at the price of these giant life-size Pokemon and it was a ridiculous amount of money. Yep. 379 pounds each. Just giant size too. And at that giant size, all you're really doing is getting a lot of fabric and a lot of stuffing. Like there isn't any extra detail going on there. And from the way this looks, I wouldn't expect that it is particularly going to be firm or have kind of a skeletal structure of any sort. It might have some thin wires to just keep things straight, and that might be about it. But if you had a kid actually trying to lay on it, you would probably find that it just falls flat very quickly. It almost feels like these life-size plushies would be something you would have, the Pokemon company would have created for a event and decided to sell the extras after the event, or an amusement park, yeah, that might make some sense, but then you wouldn't make them really plushy at that point. You would probably, for an event, make them more rigid and long lasting, or an amusement park for sure. Let's see, Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake update is now available. It adds transversal improvements, a shortcut feature, and more. Interesting. You can see Dragon Quest 2D 3 2D HD Remake is rated mostly positive, and it was on my follow list. Apparently it has some censorship that happened to it. I barely remember that, if I remember it at all. But I'm not going to let censorship alone stop me from emptying my fault list at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that to my wish list. Do I want to make another YouTube short on it? Not right now. I have like 600 YouTube shorts right now, and that is the middle ones that are not going to have the text-to-speech fully implemented. And then I probably am going to have another 600 YouTube shorts with the full text-to-speech once I get to that point. So the hope is that sometime in the next 6 months, before the end of the year, we'd have full text-to-speech implemented. But that is going to just require having a ton come out per day. And heck, that's just the way the YouTube shorts work for me anyways. And yeah, I am trying to think of other ways to make different kinds of YouTube shorts instead, and I just don't see how I would do it. Like, because my podcast here, news, is hard to really break into YouTube shorts and would be visually kind of ugly to do that, and my pre-recorded footage, if I get any of that scheduled and coming out, also runs into that same problem. So yeah, I need a bit of inspiration. I need a good idea if I was gonna make different types of YouTube shorts, and I would need that good idea to prove to me that it was worth the time, whereas the YouTube shorts that I'm making in an automated fashion, sometimes, a lot of times, videos get 1 hit view, 0 views, but then sometimes videos get 500 views and make up for potentially 499 other shorts getting no views. Of course, the thing I need most right now for my YouTube channel is watch time, which obviously I'm not going to get a big burst of watch time unless some people decide to be very generous and go and watch my old videos through my playlists. And so I won't get any major burst in watch time until I start putting out more pre-recorded footage, I imagine. And I suppose I could be really jaded. It never occurred to me, but if I did get into the YouTube Partner Program, I could potentially just be very jaded and stop doing the live stream news like this altogether and only put out pre-recorded footage, which is what I really would be interested in, like people to watch. But no, I don't think I would do that. That would be very jaded. It would be kind of dumb to do it there. Bait and switchy, certainly. Anyways, Gamatsu says Hell Maiden debut trailer details and screenshots are available. Toho Project meets Vampire Survivors deck builder. Again, deck builder seems like it's a big thing that's happening right now. Which, in fairness, the concept of triggering abilities or events by cards is not a terrible concept. It is definitely fairly logical. Perhaps when you see deck building in a game, you're seeing people hope that at some distant point they could take their video game and turn it into a tabletop game as a limited edition extra thing to sell. Got a collection of different colored haired anime girls all through the thumbnail here. Let's see. If I'm gonna try any Survivor game, I think my first thing is I've just got to play Vampire Survivors, since that seems to have started this whole trend, at least for this generation. And then if I like Vampire Survivors, I will have to start considering what other games are unique enough that it'd be worth pointing them out in comparison to Vampire Survivors. I can't see a different way to cover that whole genre. Which, yeah, there's a Limbo or Dante's Inferno element here, in that you have a character named Dante, you have Homer, you have Virgil, all being shown as anime girls, which, yeah. Does Vampire Survivors have boss battles? Or is that where the Toho element comes in? Still don't really know what Toho means. There might be something about the gameplay style of Survivors games in that you're just kind of constantly on the move and playing in one long session that speaks to a certain type of player who is not interested in like turn-based slower processing games. Which, in fairness, yeah, there is that big split between action RPG players and turn-based RPG players. Not actually too much about the cards, though. But yeah, this looks interesting enough. But I will have to certainly be fairly discerning about any Survivor series of games that I would cover also, since there's so many of them. I really would have to pick the most well received, or I could go off the norm and play something very weird, which that game might be fairly weird. Let's see. Monolith says that procedurally generated assets in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 reduced man hours considerably. This is from Video Game Chronicles. The studio says automating the creation of some of its 100,000 assets allowed more time to focus on gameplay. Well, you, with a claim like that, are kind of in between a rock and a hard place. If it reduced man hours, that means that people weren't getting paid for work. People who very well may have wanted to be paid for work. Of course, these might be Japanese developers, so they might be salary people who are just getting forced to do overtime and be unpaid for that, which is a whole separate issue, certainly. On the other hand, you definitely have had a desire from at least mainstream video game journalists to see the end of crunch culture and overworking game developers, who definitely feel like they are workaholics. But this is inherently the problem with all of these situations, is that rich capitalist people, the managers, create a problem, which is they don't hire enough people and they overwork their current staff. And then they propose a solution, which is let's save some money by using AI so we can pay less people. And then there won't be so much crunch. It is convenience. And capitalism 101. Create a demand, create a supply. Have a supply, then create a demand sometimes too. But yeah, I guess you just have to put your foot in the ground if you care at all and say no AI generation ever, no procedurally generated stuff. Although by calling it procedurally generated, it may very well not be AI, too much AI, and it may very well just be programmatically made. Inherently, a lot of the guns in the Borderlands games are procedurally generated in that they made scripts and randomized the skins and the stats of games, and games have always had some level of procedural generation when you get random loot drops with random stats, and that has not been too much of a problem because it really wasn't reducing man hours or causing people to get laid off, which inherently, yeah, we cannot even begin to have the discussion about whether AI should be used while we are in the middle of seeing so many game companies lay off programmers left and right. Not just programmers, but developers and employees in general. Let's see. I believe Apple finally accepted Fortnite, and it is back on the US store. So I think this is an old article, but certainly they drug their feet, and I believe a judge sent a strongly worded message to Apple saying that they had to either reject it and face getting in trouble for rejecting Fortnite or approve it, but they couldn't just sit there and neither approve or reject it and pout. Video Games Chronicle says Star Wars Battlefront 2 devs want to get the band back together to make Battlefront 3. EA concluded support of Battlefront 2 in 2020. So they've had 5 years in which they were doing something different. More than likely, they are desperately trying to find any work that would keep them employed. I think Battlefront 2 was received particularly well, so it wouldn't be the craziest thing to make a Battlefront 3, although I don't know if that's the direction Disney wants to go to at this point. Like, I hear Andor is being received really well, so the new Star Wars may very well not be Darth Maul. Like, I barely can even remember Darth Maul's name, or Vader or Yoda. It may be a whole new generation yet again of Star Wars characters that they're trying to promote and trying to pivot Star Wars into being something very different than what it was in previous decades, which it's changed quite a bit over time in many different instances. Ys versus Trails in the Sky alternative saga launches this summer in the West. It is apparently a crossover fighting game. Interesting. Doesn't look like it's going to be on console though. I mean, on PC. It will be on consoles, PS4, PS5, and Nintendo Switch. Well, that is not what I was expecting to see when they said fighting game. That you would be in a isometric top-down view fighting each other. What a weird way to animate a fighting game. And apparently you have like 4 people fighting at the same time. weird format. Although I wonder if maybe there is room for changing how a fighting game looks and making it more of a top-down beat 'em up brawl type game. I don't know though. I suppose Smash Brothers with the no, Smash Brothers has about the same visual styles as any other 2D fighting game, and something like Virtual Fighter with 3D stages really just had like side steps. That was about the only thing that ever made sense. Anyways, is to just be able to pivot a little bit and step to the side to dodge an attack. But yeah, I don't think isometric or top-down or first-person for a fighting game really would work. It would be a very hard challenge, at least. Moving on, Gaming on Linux says the heroic launcher for Epic Good Old Games Amazon Games on Linux SteamOS version 2.17 has been released, with some main changes here, which I will just scroll down and show and move on. Yakuza 0 voice cast says the new director cut scenes says the new director's cut scenes give a sense of closure. The Switch 2 release will feature around 26 minutes of new cutscenes. Yeah, I read that one way thinking it was a new director who had cut scenes, but actually it's the director's cut. So really what you should do is take this and put it here. So it said Yakuza 0 director's cut voice cast says new scenes gives a sense of closure. Although perhaps not use give, maybe say gave a sense of closure to them. Bungie confirmed that it had stolen art assets in the Marathon Alpha. That story is kind of not being reported anymore because it's already been confirmed. And I guess that does show that just admitting your mistake, and even if you are just throwing an employee under the bus, makes the story mostly go away. Unfortunately for Bungie, it made the story go away where now it is apparently a case that it is now known that that Bungie is at an all-time low morale-wise and perhaps on the verge of just collapsing as a company. The Switch 2 supports USB mouse controls, the developer reveals. A standard mouse can be used instead of a Joy-Con 2 mouse controls. I question how that's going to work. Well, more than question how that's going to work, because actually it's pretty easy to guess how that would work. There's a problem with it, in that if you have a standard mouse, let's go old school. You have a left mouse button, you have a right mouse button, let's even say you have a middle mouse button. But let's just assume you don't have a scroll wheel, and you don't have any side buttons. You're not a gaming mouse with 10 extra hotkey buttons on the side. How do you map the number of buttons, even on one Joy-Con, to 3 buttons and a mouse movement input? Like, it doesn't happen. So this could be left mouse, and this could be right mouse, and this could be middle mouse, and then you would be left with 2 triggers here, the plus button, which I don't think would actually map to anything, the B button, the analog stick in all directions and being clicked down, the home button probably can't be remapped, and the chat button can't be remapped. So you have an analog stick and a click here, you have 1, 2, 3 extra buttons, which doesn't sound like it's a problem, but it does now speak to a limitation where It is now highly unlikely, it's been confirmed, that because you can use a regular USB mouse, it's going to be highly unlikely that any game is going to require you to touch more than 3 buttons while in mouse mode. And more than likely, I would guess, you only use this as the left click. You use the Y button as the right click, because that's how I've seen it used before. And then X, A, B, and the analog stick are not used. One assumes in mouse mode, plus and home and chat all still work. The secondary trigger, which I think it has a secondary trigger, but that might really just be the magnet release, would not be used. It is going to be questionable if anybody is ever encouraged to use a mouse, and what adding a mouse would really do, because I think most of the games that are going to use mouse mode are going to be kind of gimmicky games overall. But who knows, we may just get a bunch of real-time strategy games or first-person shooters, and all of a sudden people are playing them on their Switch 2 with mouse and keyboard. Could also be that this producer is just totally wrong and the debug version of the Switch 2 allows for USB mouses, but and I would assume it's just one USB mouse and you can't just plug in 2, although it might be 2. I wouldn't be surprised if the non-developer mode actually doesn't support a USB mouse, which, notice it says USB here. It is not talking about Bluetooth mice. No confirmation that you could wirelessly connect a Bluetooth mouse to a Switch 2. So that would mean you would have to have a dongle for your mouse, and it would have to probably be a 2.4 gigahertz wireless mouse. It's kind of interesting though that mice are still at 2.4 gigahertz. Really, they could be at 5 gigahertz and send twice the data. I'm not sure they really need to send twice the data though. The refresh rate and polling may not be improved much if they went to 5 or 6 gigahertz. Then we had another glitch in my macro for some reason. One second, I need to minimize that. That's way too bright, just one big white screen. Gaming on Linux says Marvel's Spider-Man 2 gets NVIDIA DLSS 4 improvements and a Steam Deck and SteamOS improvement. Yeah. Which, yeah. What's the cheapest this has been? It's never been on sale. So there is a decent argument to grabbing Spider-Man 2 on Steam the second it goes on sale, if it goes on sale. I don't know if there's a Spider-Man 1 on Steam though, so you also are going to be weirdly painted into that corner. No, I guess Spider-Man 1 is on Steam, and Miles Morales is on Steam. I just haven't gotten around to buying any of them. Which, yeah, if money was no object, that would easily set my schedule for the next 3 years, as I could just play one Spider-Man game per year for one series. Let's see. We already talked about how this article, how the former PlayStation boss says stupid money crippled the game industry. And I think we're starting to see games that just have come out. And so I'm going to have to decide whether I want to make YouTube shorts on these games or not. We talked about this. We talked about this. We talked about this. And so I think we will have talked about all of these. So again, some stupid change has caused my macros to not work sometimes. Embracer now spinning off Coffee Stain Group and rebranding its remaining business. And the fall list cleanup still is not opening up. And that was the most recent change I tried to do, was to figure out why the fall list was not opening up any news articles. Former LEGO Group child safety expert joins Roblox as the head of a parental advisory board. Quote, "It's my personal mission to give parents the confidence and skills to raise their child to thrive online." It is worth pointing out, though, that the LEGO Group until very recently has not done much as far as online safety for kids. They haven't done much online at all, and so they haven't had a major need for online safety for kids. It basically boils down to, if you try to go to lego.com, it puts a pop-up and says, "Hey, are you under 18? Go to this website to play around with free digital content, or if you're over 18, go to the shop and actually buy LEGO sets." Which I imagine is somewhat insulting for your kids that actually have money and are allowed to shop for LEGO sets online. Although I don't think I'd be letting kids buy things online, even if they did have money. I would do that for them just to make sure that they're at the right website and not getting scammed. We talked about the Elden Ring movie too, and this is from GameDeveloper.com. So the newest articles, weirdly at the end there. Okay. And this is the point where I think we're going to go through all of the games that came out on Steam and try to find any that are worth making YouTube shorts on. And then I imagine what I'm going to do is try and reset my browser to figure out why it's running so slow. We have an actual horse game here that is overwhelmingly positive. So I've been trying for years to find a girl horse game, and I will say this still doesn't look amazing, but I've been trying for years to find one that was single player, didn't have in-app purchases, or anything like that. And looks like we finally found one. That being said, I may never actually get around to playing this game to show off for the people who are actually interested in horses, which I am actually not. But I'm going to give it a YouTube short, just because it has accomplished the impossible. And that's one more category of games where I really only needed to find one good one per decade or so to potentially show off. And this is still just moving really way too slow. I never considered that maybe the local storage getting filled up might be a problem. I don't know if that's really the case of what's happening right now. I'm pretty sure it isn't, but it is a unknown or a known unknown as far as just how many local storage cookies can I really have in Firefox before Firefox just comes to a crawl. It may be a number problem more than a storage space problem. Yeah. Inherently, everything I'm doing is kind of cutting edge and experimental and just at a much larger scale than most, so it's no surprise Firefox isn't really designed to open 2,000 tabs. all in a row within a very short amount of time, or 2,000 tabs at all. But that does, here we have another garbage political game. It does highlight how you should always develop your software, is develop it so that it is insanely powerful if at all possible, and yeah, and forward thinking as much as possible, and that it would still run very nicely and smoothly in 10 or 25 years when the demand and usage is much higher. A lot of times when you are programming, if you have a good set of tools and a good programming language, here's another one of these Chinese asset flip garbage games. I'm gonna just move this over here just to make sure we have opened up enough tabs. I think the answer to that is probably true, and we can see that a lot of these are from the 21st and already have checkboxes on them, so I can close all of those. Yeah, if you do a decent job of programming, there is a decent chance your programs will scale up and run on faster, newer computers. But not 100% chance. There's a lot of programs from the past that would have been designed to run on a 400 megahertz processor that still run pretty poorly even on a 4 gigahertz processor. Yeah, 10 times faster CPU. And way larger group of programs that would have been developed to run on a 400 megahertz processor that just don't run at all because you have it in Windows 10 instead of it running in DOS. But yeah, there was a big concern when DOS was no longer included with Windows. Like, DOS was included with Windows 95, and Windows 98, I believe, stopped including DOS. And yeah, I imagine there was some struggle there to get some programs to work, but nowhere as big of a problem as it seemed like it might be. And in fairness, most of the DOS programs that weren't going to work on Windows 98 just needed to be updated. Anyways, not that all of them did get updated. There is like no really telling how many games were lost over the forced updates from different versions of DOS to different versions of Windows. Warhammer 40k Speed Freaks already getting mixed reviewed. Very poorly reviewed. This is gonna leave the follow list. Man, it's just taking forever to do anything. Yeah. Try to get that one. When you click these, you are effectively querying the servers and loading in something via a JavaScript event. So it is very similar to loading a page. Now, honestly, this may be a case where the problem is my network, and I just need to reset my network. So I guess that could be the case. I guess because my macro went wild here, I just don't know if there was any curation going on. One would hope there was, but no certainty. This Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game has been advertising quite a bit, trying to get people interested in the announcement. It's finally come out, and so far it's doing good. Lightning struck orphan. Might be something. Out of sight. Already seen that one. How many more of these are there? It's not getting any better. That's really what it needed to do, is it needed to get better. And I started about 15 minutes late, and so whenever I do get around to ending, I'm not really able to blame being super late. I'm gonna have to just blame it on my macros taking too long to run to start with, and my macros also let me try something here. Let me think about this. Could it be trying to see if this is open. Yeah. Double check. It might be my macro extension. It could be running still. So if I close that and then maybe even disable this. Now I won't disable it, but maybe closing that alone would be enough to speed things up. Let me try that. Let's just see. Manage extension, disable extension, then re-enable it. So effectively restart the extension. I doubt that's going to fix anything. And I'm really just assuming it's that one extension add-on. It could be any of a dozen. But it did just seem like the gesture there worked all of a sudden. And I haven't been able to really use the gestures like it was before. Does this support English? No, it doesn't. That one would have been a tough decision, and it's taking too long. It does seem like we're getting a decent number of Doom clones since Doom the Dark Ages just got released. Of course, the Doom clones are very much games that are 2D, not anywhere to the level of fidelity that Doom the Dark Ages has. And I think Doom the Dark Ages actually plays in a weird way that isn't like the previous Doom games anyways, and the previous Doom games of the reboot don't even play like the original Doom do. You can see Splitgate 2 beta here is not being received particularly well, which, yep, shame I guess. And I think I just fixed it. So sometimes I actually know what I'm talking about. One of these Ghost Hunter games, I'm not sure I'd ever really play it. This one specifically is single player anyways. It's an interesting thought to play Ghost Hunter, ghost investigative game, but I really see that more as a premise to some other kind of gameplay. Probably just a more standard horror game or a walking simulator, something like that. Let's see, Warhammer 40k bolt gun, Wars of Vengeance. Seems like this is probably a either spin-off game or a demo. Oh yes, this is a Typing of the Dead style game. Interesting. As a way of promoting the actual bolt gun game series, to have this typing minigame. What's crazy about these typing games is that there's basically a history and tradition now of making typing games out of horrifically gory shooting games that in no way would ever be allowed in a school classroom. So where you really would want to teach typing, it would never be used. Linked banner of the Spark apparently is out of early access. Single player with online co-op. Let me just look at this real quick and see if it's actually anything I'd want to play. You know what? I don't even need to make that decision. I'm just going to throw it onto the wish list at the moment, and I will deal with it when I do the wish list cleanup. That is a problem for future me. Yeah, the more I thought about it, this is an interesting hidden object game that feels a little bit more like a point and click game. But notice it's not tagged as point and click and is just labeled as hidden object. But yeah, I guess it made a lot of sense that since that was the last thing I used was my macros, that maybe it, because it was acting weird, glitched out and was still running in the background, causing the whole problems. This is a VR game in early access, so I'll check this and put it in the VR checkboxes. Now, these are May 22 games, and are we working our way towards May 23 games? It could be a quite large number of games to go through if it is truly the case that my macro has been only opening the last 100 of games and not all the new games. Although it may not even really work that way. Oh yeah, I definitely am wishing, both in video games and in tabletop games, as I think more about tabletop games, I would wish for more new, unique storylines and visuals. Mostly visuals, I would say. But yeah, you get a lot of this, particularly on Steam. And certainly it wears down me and probably everybody else, where it's all just a little too similar. Even when you get like a puzzle game that should be fairly unique, you often get these kind of laser line puzzle games that just look exactly the same, even if they are somehow different. And these single screen Unity puzzle games, as I described them in the past, have a really hard time at this point convincing me to want to really play them. And it's not just games though. Like, I'm looking for new art styles, new visual depictions in just about everything. Even new medium of art would be interesting and worth trying. So one thing, I guess, if aliens did land on the planet, I would hope that they could bring thousands of years of history of new art and new ways of thinking, new ways of depicting things, and I would hope that I could in any way actually appreciate any of that new art. Well, I guess that's a long way of saying that humanity sometimes feels a little boring, a little repetitive. And in fairness, I'm not creating anything amazingly new and revolutionary either. I'm not usually creating anything at all. Even when I do try to create something, I tend to drop the ball on those projects. Days with Girlfriends. This one is one that says it has adult content in it. Apocalypse Zombie Tower Defense with anime girls. I saw a meme where it was a picture of a life note, as in a contrast to a death note, where I guess the assumption is you write the name of something or someone down in a life note and think of that person's face, and then 2 minutes later they come back to life, unless you give more instructions as far as how they come back to life, which would be a difficult thing certainly to implement and think about if they were to try and make a story around something like that. It would be an interesting twist to say that such a thing exists, but that almost feels like that would be the porn parody of Death Note, where you would, instead of bringing dead people back to life, you perhaps would create babies and then impregnate people just by thinking of them and writing their name down in the notebook. Yeah. And as far as Death Note as an anime and a story, if you were going to do something new with that, you would take the same Death Note concept and book, and you would just hand it to a very different type of person. And throughout the anime series of Death Note, they do hand it to a bunch of people, but they are generally all the same kind of bad people, for lack of a better term, that use it to attain their own desires. Yeah. Tainted Grail, Fall in Avalon. Maybe very positively single player. Go ahead and put that on the wish list too. This is It would be odd to try and play something like this instead of Oblivion Remastered. And that really sucks, I'm sure, for them, is that they're a new game and they're almost certainly not getting anywhere the attention, although they do have a 24-hour peak of 12,000 players for a single-player game. But yeah, almost certainly they're not getting the level of attention they should be getting just because of Oblivion getting remastered and re-released. I guess that's the problem of competition. Whereas I guess if everybody was just making games for the betterment of society or for fun, game publishers and game developers might very well work together and just take turns to release their games as staggered as possible away from each other so that everybody could play everything. And that is an interesting thought, certainly. Is it the case that Steam gamers, PC gamers, gamers in general have too many games? Or is it the case that too many games come out at the same time? And if things were staggered, there would be a lot more games being played. Inherently, for the first 6 months of this year, it feels like there's been enough time for people to play new games, and yet for the most part it seems like most people didn't. Alright, well, we're at the point where it says the end of the show. We still didn't have any video game news fall list cleanup happen, so I don't know why the macro isn't working there. I don't know why the macro is glitching. I think over the weekend I have a mandate to try to work on my macros once again until I finally get them working, and then I can hopefully swear off working on them for quite a long time. But yes, I'll probably do some other stuff too. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.